This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have a major story coming into the spotlight again, and that is that a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the release of yet another illegally deported migrant. This one, a man only known as OCG. They're withholding his identity for fear of his life. He is gay, and he's been targeted for being gay in his home country. And so now we're, again, I think roughly the third migrant who is illegally deported. And so what happens if the Trump administration continues to rack up these demands that these illegally deported migrants get released, and they just continue to refuse to comply?
Yeah, so this case is, just tragic. I mean, this is a Guatemalan gentleman who faced a credible threat to his life and to his ability to function in society in Guatemala. He came through Mexico en route to the United States. In Mexico, he was kidnapped and raped and wound up in the United States. And so, of course, what did the Trump administration do? They, of course, deported him back to Mexico, where he had just been subject to horrific crimes. In doing so, and this will not surprise anyone, they misled a federal judge. I know, it feels like this is just a recurrent thing.
Yeah.
But they told the judge when this guy first filed his lawsuit, don't worry, he actually told us he wanted to go back to Mexico. And it's out that the Department of Justice has now had to admit that that actually is not true. He did not express a willingness to go back to Mexico. He is currently hiding out in Guatemala, again, fearing for his life. And so, the Trump administration doesn't have its usual bag of excuses here. They could send a plane to have this guy returned to the United States. There is no argument that, he's in a gulag someplace where a foreign government won't send him back. This is just the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security and the Trump White House doing what we know it's really doing in all of these cases, which is subjecting migrants to terror by sending them horrible places where they will be victimized, and then not being forthcoming with the court, lying to the court in some instances about the circumstances, and then finally acting like there's nothing they can do about it.
Right.
And this judge, I think, has had enough. I mean, I think a lot of the judges have had enough, but I think this judge in particular has had enough. And so we will see where we go from here. But I think that the Department of Justice lawyers, are going to have to explain how the hell this mishap happened and do a whole lot of explaining for why the hell they can't just get this guy back.
How is it not immediate contempt if you're caught lying to the judge? And if there is contempt on the table, what kind of legal exposure do the attorneys who argued this stuff in court actually have?
Yeah, I think there is contempt all the way around here.
Yeah.
I mean, there is contempt for why this guy was sent to Mexico, why there was a false statement made to the court that he had somehow assented or agreed to go to Mexico. There are also potential contempt issues here about why the administration won't just retrieve him, and bring him back. I mean, this is, Brian, the thing that is in some ways the most puzzling, but also the biggest tell, because we've had now a series of instances in which the Trump administration has had to admit that it made an error. It either made an error of fact and it sent people under facts and circumstances that were not correct, or it made an error in sending people, like, for example, in the case of at least one individual, in violation of a previous court order. The instinct of government lawyers should be, well, we're going to correct all that, because after all, we don't want to be sending migrants out of the country in error.
Right.
In fact, it would do a lot of good for the Trump administration's sort of posture to say, when we make an error, we fix the error, right? We don't want to be making errors. We want to be sending the worst of the worst out, not a gay man who has been brutalized, right, and has a reasonable claim of asylum. And so the question is, why aren't they doing that? And so to answer your question on contempt, I think that they are not doing it because they want to be contemptuous of the court. They want to show their supporters, they want to show the American people, and they want to show the judges that they will not simply do what the law requires. They will do whatever it is that Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and the rest, J.D. Vance and the rest of them want to do.
When judges see that the Trump administration is so unwilling to actually follow the law, especially as it relates to these cases, do subsequent judges take that into account? Or, like, let's say there's another illegal deportation case, and they already know that the Trump administration isn't going to comply with some order demanding the facilitation of the release or the return of that person. And so is that taken into account in some way, or does every case have to stand on its own 2 feet, irrespective of what happens in other cases?
Well, so both. I mean, I think that every case has to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of the facts of the individual or groups of individuals. But there's no question the courts take notice of how the administration has responded to other court orders and to these administrative errors it makes. I mean, look, they lost a case 7-2 in the Supreme Court very recently over whether or not they could have a plane load of another group of migrants sent out of the country. And there's no question that the reason why the court ruled the way it did, why the Supreme Court halted that, was because it is seen that the administration does not bring people back when it makes a mistake. So, essentially the Supreme Court was left with the question of, do we let the planes go out with these folks, knowing that if we then rule against the government, we can't get them back? Or do we halt everything because it all has to get adjudicated before anyone's removed from the country? And I want to say with some confidence, and it doesn't give me any pleasure to say that this conservative Supreme Court would have let migrants be shipped out of the country, I believe, if the administration had brought back the 1 or 2 who had sued where it was clear they'd made an error. Now, I'm not happy about the fact that a conservative Supreme Court would have done that, but I think by the time you have lost the Chief Justice, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Comey Barrett, like, you've gone a long way to alien a court otherwise very predisposed towards pretty aggressive and expansive executive powers.
So we're in a moment right now where we're seeing the Trump administration defy the courts. We're still waiting for the Trump administration to come into compliance with that unanimous ruling demanding the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We've seen numerous other rulings, all of which the Trump administration has not complied with yet. And so I guess in the moment that we're in right now, it looks like the courts are not able to basically assert their own authority over the executive branch. But in reality, we're waiting for these processes to work their way through the appeals process, or we're waiting for these contempt proceedings to continue, or we're waiting for certain time thresholds to pass before the administration is truly just ignoring or defying these rulings. And so when will it come to a head where we're actually going to see whether the courts are willing to stand up to the Trump administration, or whether we're in the midst of a true constitutional crisis and the Supreme Court just allows the executive branch to run roughshod over it?
Yeah. So look, this is going to echo a theme that you and I talked a lot about the criminal prosecutions of Donald Trump and the way the courts handled that. I think I am at the point of saying that the courts are failing to do what they need to do. Yeah. I mean, I understand that they want to give the Trump administration and the Department of Justice every opportunity to purge itself of contempt. I understand they want to give the benefit of the doubt to the government lawyers. I understand all of the hesitancy to move too quickly to contempt. But we're at a point now where, once again, Donald Trump and his minions are simply making a mockery of these court orders, right? At some point, if you cannot, if a court is not willing to pull the trigger and say you are in contempt, it's not willing to pull the trigger and just issue a firm ultimatum that if that line is then not met, that there are dire consequences, then history shows that Donald Trump is not going to do anything other than push, push, push. And, I want to remind your audience, if they haven't watched, J.D. Vance gave an interview recently while it's literally sitting in the Vatican. I mean, literally sitting in the Vatican, having just met with the Pope. And it is bone chilling to hear him talk about migrants, to hear him talk about how he thinks the courts are slowing down the removal process of these migrants, and his not very veiled threat to the courts, saying that basically they can't get in the way of a popularly elected president. Now, set aside everything else that is crazy about that,
Yeah.
everything else that is, immoral about that, as he sits in the Vatican, having spoken to the new Pope, who is standing up for the rights of migrants. I mean, and all of the hypocrisy that comes with that. It was a very bone-chilling experience to hear him talk about the courts as this kind of obstacle that either they can get on board with Donald Trump or maybe the administration will have to roll through them. And I think that part of that, Brian, is because we have seen judges not willing to just lay down the law.
So am I kind of being naive here in the sense that, okay, I'm giving the courts the benefit of the doubt in assuming that it's not that they're not standing, like my initial thought when I come into this is, look, the courts are still just, there are certain avenues, there are certain processes that still have to play themselves out before we can really get to the showdown. But is there a world in which we're already past that? And in fact, these are just like the last gasps of a judicial system that's maybe trying to at least give itself the pretense that it's asserting its own autonomy. But really, the game was given up when the Trump administration refused to comply the first time, and really nothing happened. And so now we're just in that constitutional crisis already.
So, Brian, again, I think people should go back and watch all the videos you and I did during the Trump criminal trials, because I feel the same way now as I did then, which was that you had judges issuing orders telling Donald Trump, for example, he could not attack law clerks, could not attack, witnesses. And then Donald Trump would do it.
Right.
And you and I do these videos. And I know you did videos with Glenn, and those were great. And I wrote about this on Democracy Doc, and I think that was important. But like at the end, you and I would go back and forth about like, what's the point of courts issuing these orders, whether it was to protect witnesses in the criminal trial or it's to bring these people back now, if they're not willing to enforce them. So look, the guy who was sent to Mexico is not, El Salvador.
Right.
Mexico would send him back if, in fact, he's currently hiding in Guatemala. Guatemala is not El Salvador. Like, he's not in a maximum security prison. Send someone to get him and bring him back. And if they won't do that, Your Honor, speaking to the judge, you need to just hold them in contempt. And by the way, I would say it goes beyond the immigration cases. I mean, you and I have talked about the Doge cases.
Yeah.
You and I talked about the dismantling of the federal government cases. We have talked about the unlawful firing cases. I just read on social media today, a bunch of academics did a study that said that Donald Trump and his administration has lost something like 95% of the cases that have been litigated this month. Well, that's great, but where are the judges enforcing their orders?
Right.
And I think if we just keep giving the administration more time and more opportunity for excuses, this isn't going to get better. And I'll just end with this piece of the rant, Brian. Remember when the federal judge was really angry about the plane that took off, and there was an order that the plane had to turn around. It didn't turn around. And the judge was, spitting mad. Where's that?
Yeah.
Where is the outcome? Where are the people being held in contempt there? Remember the other judge who said, I want in the Garcia case that said, I want status reports every day at 5 p.m. What did we get? We didn't get status reports at 5 p.m. We got these form, declarations that would come in at 8 p.m. They'd be skipped some days. Like, this is what happens is if you try to be reasonable with Donald Trump, it just gets worse and worse.
Right. Right. And this is a broader theme, but if you give an inch, if you give any goodwill, it will be abused. It will be abused immediately, and he'll never meet you halfway. You're always just going to come a little bit closer and he's going to step a little bit farther away. And then you'll come a little bit closer and he's going to step a little bit farther away, knowing that if he can just wait it out, eventually he'll get what he needs. And he is the one who derives the benefit from the delay. That's why he uses these dilatory tactics when he himself was being prosecuted. And he's doing the exact same thing here, where he's just waiting out the process. The spotlight dims on whatever case it may be. The force and vigor of Judge Boasberg or Judge Howell or whatever judges are prosecuting or adjudicating these cases kind of goes away a little bit just by virtue of the sheer amount of time. And really, he's the one that benefits from all of this. So Like, I think you're absolutely right, and you have been a leader in terms of calling this out. So for everybody watching right now, to elevate Mark's voice, which I think is especially important at this moment, where you won't have the mainstream media do it, you won't have so many people in the political zeitgeist doing it. This is the voice that we need to elevate. So if you're watching right now, please make sure to subscribe to Mark's YouTube channel called Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.